Thank you for having me. Where's the thing on? There it is. So, I'm Jess, and thank you for the lovely introduction. There it is. Okay, so today we are obviously going to be talking about autism and women. I was asked to speak today about what women thought about autism, and I've taken this very, very literally. And I've gone and spoken to a lot of my clients who are all autistic. A lot of them, many of them are, most of them are female. And I've collected quotes from them. And they're going to be broken down into autism in general, diagnosis and identity and what that means to people, and also masking, so this idea of camouflaging, pretending to kind of fit into a non-autistic world. I will then give you my kind of final thoughts, and we will. There will also be an opportunity to have a Q&A as well. If anybody would like to ask questions, please wait till the end to do so. Thank you. So, a little bit about me. Oh, have I gone? There we go. That's me when I was about 3 years old in my beautiful green hat. I looked a little bit like a leprechaun. That hat never left my head. At this point, we didn't know, me and my family didn't know that I was autistic, but I was, because you're born autistic. As was previously mentioned, I'm an autism mentor, which means I work with autistic adults without learning disabilities, helping them just to kind of make changes in their lives. I'm also a trainer and presenter, and an assessor as well. I'm not medically trained, so they are non-clinical assessments, but for a lot of the women that I see, that's all they actually need. They just need somebody to say yes or no kind of definitively. I also have a PGC, so a postgraduate certificate in autism, which I focused on eating disorders because it's an area that I think is really underrepresented within research. I'm also a mother of twins. My twins are 14 and nearly as tall as me now. And I'm also a stepmother to 2 children as well. My partner is here with me today. Sorry, love. I was also diagnosed, as previously mentioned, I was diagnosed dyslexic when I was 16 at college, and diagnosed age 31 as autistic. That completely changed my life. It made me realise who I actually was, and I will kind of talk a little bit more about that later on. So, firstly, what do autistic women say about autism? The next slide has got quotes on it. Please don't worry if you can't see them. I will be reading each one out as I go along. So this top one, a lot has changed over the last few years, but we still have a long way to go. More research by and for autistic people is needed. The person who wrote the quote was from is an autistic professional. She's autistic herself and works with autistic people. In my opinion, the best source of information is autistic women. We can be an incredibly opinionated and chatty bunch. So ask us what we need. Ask us what is missing from the support that we're getting. It also seems that still a lot of research is based on children or those with additional and or complex needs, and isn't necessarily focused on autistic women who are living independently. Some of the areas of research that I hear people think are needed, and I agree with this myself, is women's health, including experiences of puberty, periods, menopause, pregnancy and parenting, eating, including eating disorders, but not just eating disorders, but actually about food as well and how autistic people interact with food, because we know that it's different, but actually there isn't a huge amount of research out there. And also relationships as well. Healthcare professionals need more information to be able to support the women that they're working with. Anxiety and mental health go hand in hand with autism. We all know that. This isn't new news. but there needs to be a better understanding of actually how to support these people. I don't know what it's like in the Netherlands, but in the UK, most mental health professionals, and we're talking from mental health nurses right up to psychiatrists, only have a module in all of their training. So if you're talking between 3 years and 10 years, only having a tiny amount of information about autism, to me that's not enough. It's too complex, it's too big. So the next one is about misconceptions. The quote is, or quote, "I challenge the stereotype of autism. I like socialising and appear flexible, but it always has to be on my terms." Another one, "I wish people would stop saying I don't look autistic." How do you look autistic? That's what I want to know. Another quote, "There seems to be a misconception that to be autistic you need to be male or not able to live independently. Women can present differently to men. We know this. Again, this is not new news. I've heard of autistic females that are talking in full sentences at less than a year old, and then are incredibly chatty later on in life. May have lots of life experiences, and may be interested in gender-typical interests. Might be mimicking body language so they appear to look like they know what they're doing. Too much eye contact. Multiple short-lived interests. And this one really resonates with me. It was one of the reasons why I thought that I couldn't be autistic, was because that I didn't have one lifelong interest. In fact, I've had several and they have been diverse, including wrestling, paintballing, welding, knitting, photography, baking, art history. I actually started a degree in that one and never finished it. It's the learning curve, that's the exciting bit. And autism as well, and luckily I've managed to make a career out of that one, so that's good. Another misconception is that, autistic people are very rigid. So when you have a woman who appears very flexible, again, it doesn't look like autism, and this is why I think that people are being missed. Autistic women are being missed. So another quote, "She is exhausted just by the business of running an ordinary life." This came from a research paper that I found, and I just went, oh wow. It just sums up being autistic in a non-autistic world. Having to think about the social rules, everyday planning, your routines changing, people not doing things in a logical way, sensory attacks around every corner, food planning, the shops running out of the food that you really want, that one brand, and then having to make a decision about it. And an internal monologue, that voice in your head that just never shuts up. Constantly wondering if you're making enough eye contact, right facial expressions, standing right. This is why we are all exhausted all of the time. And then finally, on this slide, the last quote. We need to stop thinking about autism in terms of high and low functioning. I didn't do this. This is something that I pinched off of Google, but it is credited at the bottom. Most people think that autism is linear, that the spectrum is linear, that you are either less autistic or really autistic. It doesn't work like that. An example of this is that I did some training a little while ago, and my car broke down on the way to the venue. I then had to completely change all of my plans for that day, and had to get a train at the last minute. Didn't get there until very, very late. What they saw on that day was me here, like you do right now. What they didn't see was me crying, having a panic attack, having a meltdown in my partner's car, 12 hours beforehand on the way. The way that the world impacts autistic people, it changes depending on what the situation is. and it's really important to not think about it in high or low functioning, because there are some days that I am high functioning, there are some days that I am low functioning, and that is the case for every autistic person I have ever met. Dr. Luke Bearden, who's an academic in the UK, came up with a really wonderful equation, which is autism plus environment equals outcome. So if the environment is good for the autistic person, for that individual autistic person, and not just the external environment, not just where they are, but also about how they're feeling inside, so making sure that they're not hungry, that they're not thirsty, that they've slept enough, that they're not anxious. If you can get all of those things right, then the outcome is always good. And I think that it just really easily sums up how you can support autistic people, or yourself if you are autistic. So, the next section. What autistic women say about diagnosis and identity. So finally feeling validated once you realise after 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years of living that you are actually autistic. This woman quoted, "My head had been spinning all my life with trying to make sense of why these things happened to me, why I was so odd, why I couldn't live like other people. The diagnosis stopped my head from spinning. I was able to breathe a sigh of relief and relax." And another woman, "It was a massive relief. I know who I am, how I can expect myself to be, that there's nothing wrong with me, and that friendships, difficulties I had weren't my fault." You just think about how that must feel for a person to realise that they're not broken, that they're not wrong, that there's nothing bad about them. They're just different in a very non-autistic world. Autism is one very small word. It's 6 letters, if I can count correctly, but it means everything to most late diagnosed women. Eventually, there is a period, which we will come to in a minute. You can finally stop beating yourself up for everything that you find hard. Stop beating yourself up because you're not quite like everyone else. Seek out support from autism-informed therapists, mentors, coaches, and mental health professionals. Find your tribe of other autistic women who won't get offended if you don't call them back, and if it takes you 3 days to text back. Start to make changes to make life more autistically friendly, and thinking about those sort of, what changes can you make in your sensory world, your social world, and your routines as well. Excuse me. Start saying no to things that you find horrifically uncomfortable. Start saying yes to things that you love doing and that they bring you joy, even if that is binge watching true crime documentaries with a glass of wine. Or a cup of tea. Start asking for your needs to be met because you finally understand what they are. Most of my clients, as I said, are late diagnosed, and I was 31 when I got my diagnosis, and it was like a light bulb moment for me. It was finally the information that we all need to be able to live our lives in the best way possible. But it's not always that easy, you know, that's very simplified, but that's because the world isn't autistically friendly as it stands at the moment. And if you're here today because you have an autistic woman in your life, whether personally or professionally, just ask yourself this: what could you do to make her life a little bit more comfortable, a little bit better? And if you're not sure, ask her, because she'll bloody tell you. So reactions can be quite different for a lot of people. Some people are just like, yeah, kind of knew it, wonderful, move on. Other people are, you know, absolutely overcome with emotion. This woman has said, the diagnosis wasn't unexpected, but the emotion that came afterwards were. I feel like I'm in a period of mourning, of grieving, and this is so common with all of the support that I do with post-diagnostic support with late diagnosed women. It is like, you know, what could I have done? What would I have done? What if, what if, what if? You're mourning a life that you could have lived just had you known whether or not you were autistic earlier. Grieving for a life that was riddled with anxiety and feeling distressed. But this is a really natural process. And if you're going through it yourself or you're supporting somebody through it, it does end and you do come out of the other side of it and you go, I'm an autistic woman and that's cool and that's brilliant and now I can make those changes. We can't change the past, but we can change the future. Self-diagnosis, I feel, is completely valid. In the UK, it is not particularly easy to get a diagnosis on the National Health Service, so for free. And this woman has said, after hearing horror stories of people going to their GP, their general practitioner, I have never bothered to get a formal diagnosis. Many women have to self-identify before they go through a diagnostic process anyway. And you know what? More than 9 out of 10 are right, because they have researched it. And people don't go, I want to be autistic. Who does that? You don't, with all of the stigma that is attached to being autistic. Why on earth would you put yourself through that? That makes no sense whatsoever. So believe them, because I tell you what, they've probably researched it a lot more than a lot of professionals have. And finally, I asked a client of mine, she's 21 years old, and she's absolutely fab, and so self-aware. She's not actually yet diagnosed, she was diagnosed as a child. But I said, what does it mean to know that you're autistic? And she said, diagnosis explains why I feel like I am green and everyone else is blue. I have a bit of blue in me, but not enough to blend in. And I just thought that was amazing for a 21-year-old to say that about herself, just how, you know, how self-aware. So what do autistic women say about masking? Masking, camouflaging, pretending who you are to kind of fit in. This first two quotes about misdiagnosis and lack of support. So that's the trouble with female ASD, is in the time slot of whether they're going to say yes or no to your diagnosis, you could be performing your camouflaging so well that they're not going to see it. Girls are really good at, you know, masking and hiding their autism so that it's harder to identify an autistic girl that needs help. Learned abilities can mask the extent of their difficulties, meaning that what people see externally is not what's going on inside. I know women that have not received a diagnosis through a clinical diagnosis because the assessor has said they're maintaining eye contact, they appeared interested and maintained a two-way conversation. They'd had too many life experiences, but the assessor did not ask them what impact those life experiences had on them, and it was massive. And you do not look autistic. Yeah. These are professionals that have said this. Most autistic women can often communicate incredibly well, but must work hard to interpret the communication of other people. And that effort of interpreting is exhausting. It is so taxing, it will greatly deplete all of their energy levels. But you can't see what's going on inside. You can't hear that internal monologue that's in their head running over and over and over again. And this can be seen in some undiagnosed autistic girls within school. In the UK, we have a term called the 4 PM explosion. And that is so that a girl is at school all day, and her teacher sees a quiet little girl sat at her desk, studious, academic, smart, bright, intelligent, doing her work. The little girl that the mother and father see at home is the devil's child, because she has spent all day pretending to be something that she's not. And that is exhausting to her. So when she comes into her safe place, her home, the mask goes, the meltdowns come. We need to be recognising the little tells in children, especially in girls, from a younger age, so that doesn't happen. Because the parents aren't believed a lot of the time. They're not believed unless they take videos, and to me that just seems awful, that you have to take a video of your child having a meltdown to be believed by a doctor. So burnout is very real for autistic women. This quote is, "I'm convinced that a lifetime of pretending has led me to burnout on multiple occasions, and masking the real me is exhausting." Exhaustion makes the mask slip, like with that little girl who's just come home from school. It happens with adults as well. And it shows who they really are. And a lot of women that I meet are actually realising that they're autistic because the mask has slipped throughout their life at some point, to the point where they've just gone, what is wrong with me? You know, what's going on here? This isn't just anxiety, this isn't just depression, this keeps happening. You know, your ability to be able to function within the world just goes completely. And it can lead to things like brain fog, an inability to speak, to listen, concentrate on things, becoming really clumsy. A burnout is categorised by 3 months or more of exhaustion and not being able to do the things that you maybe could do normally. I believe that you can also have mini burnouts as well, that are much shorter. They could be anything from a couple of days to a couple of months, but they don't quite go over into the 3-month mark. And you can kind of get back up and pick yourself up after it and then kind of crack on with life. But I also think that the more of those you have without addressing the actual cause of the problem, the more likely you are to have a massive burnout and therefore not be very well for a significant amount of time. So also with the mask, not knowing who you are. So this person's written, "I've spent so much of my life masking that I don't really know who I am anymore." And this is really common as well. And people describe it as not knowing who their authentic self is, because before diagnosis, they just went out into the world and put this mask on, day in, day out. There is a test that has been done fairly recently called the CAT-Q, C-A-T-Q. And I think that's really interesting for autistic women to be doing themselves, because it kind of gives you an idea actually how much you are masking. Off the top of my head, I think the average for an autistic woman is about 120-ish, something like that. I didn't think I masked that much. I got 143 and was like, oh wow, that's really quite high. And that just shows you that even though I am an autistic professional and I've been diagnosed for 4 or 5 years, I still didn't realise how much I was masking. And this last one, oh sorry, I've just realised that I flipped it. This last one, I should have been an actress. I just put this in there because it shows you that autistic people do have a sense of humour. Oh, the clock's on red, counting down. So, just to kind of sum everything up, this is just a snapshot of a few women's opinions. There are many, many more out there. So if you have an autistic person in your life, as I said, professionally or personally, please ask them what impact it has on them, what impact the world has on them, because it's actually not the autism, it's the world, and what you can do to make their life a little bit better. For me, autism is my whole life, both professionally and personally, and that will never change, even if I get a new job, which I really hope I don't. I am an autistic woman, and I'm really proud of that, and thank you very much for listening.